You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that is you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I'm coming at you today with something a bit new. We're going to talk about spirit science, and their weird ideas about aliens and conspiracy theories. Basically, I just need a break from nothing but young Earth creationism, and decided to open myself up to some new kinds of pseudoscience. And nothing says pseudoscience quite like the guy who said that Jews are from space, and the Egyptian god Thoth was a real guy who was also 30 feet tall and omnipotent, but somehow still sucked at saving humanity. That guy is Jordan, the owner and operator of Spirit Science, so let's see what he has to say about aliens.
The subject of extraterrestrials has mystified humanity for countless generations.
Well, I wouldn't quite say countless generations. The idea that there were other worlds than Earth that were like it in ways that could support ordinary life really traced back to the origin of heliocentrism, which demoted Earth from being the center of the universe to just one more orb among potentially countless others. Before that, there were ideas that there were inhabitants of celestial bodies, but they were more gods, angels, etc., than they were aliens in the sense of biological but not supernatural entities from other planets. So the modern conception of extraterrestrials really only goes back about 400 years, not exactly countless generations.
The question of, are we alone in the universe, has inspired us to push forward and advance as a species in the search for life in the great beyond.
This is quite true. One of the biggest motives for sending so many probes to Mars is to check for signs of ancient life there. Further, that is one of the biggest reasons that we are learning to figure out the atmospheres of exoplanets, and looking into the subsurface oceans of bodies like Europa. Humans want to find life. We want to know if Earth is just a fluke in the universe, or if life is common, or perhaps it's something in between.
But to this day, judging by the way people generally treat the subject, it would appear that we have yet to make any form of substantial contact. Yet.
Yes, because there is no verifiable contact that is unambiguously attributable to extraterrestrial life. And on top of that, there are reasons to think that even if intelligent extraterrestrials exist, they are most likely not visiting Earth. Alien encounters are kind of like Bigfoot encounters. Sure, there is hard to explain evidence out there, but ultimately what we need to confirm either is a living or deceased specimen available to scientific scrutiny. Until then, the parsimonious answer to both the Bigfoot and the alien question is that they do not exist, or at least not currently in the places they are claimed to exist.
The awareness of a deeper truth, that something is being hidden from us, is regularly being leaked to this day.
There is no doubt that the governments of the world keep secrets. Just the fact that they declassify things is sufficient to demonstrate that. But the problem is that if you want to say that the government is covering up a particular thing, you have some work cut out for you. First, it's easier if there are precedents in history. For example, there is evidence that even after the US government found out that the explosion on board the USS Maine in 1898 was the result of improperly stored gunpowder and not an attack by the Spanish, that they kept this hidden from the public to keep enthusiasm for the Spanish-American War going. So if you wanted to suggest that an explosion at a munitions storage dump at, say, an American base in Iraq were actually just an accident, and not the result of an attack by local insurgents, that would at least be reasonable, as there is precedent. But we don't have any confirmed instances of the government covering up extraterrestrials per se, although we do have confirmed instances of them investigating the same. So to jump from the government is covering up their investigations of the UFO phenomenon, to the US government is covering up their actual knowledge of aliens, you need to first show that there are aliens beyond any reasonable doubt, then you need to show that the government knows about it, then that they are actively covering up that knowledge. Simply claiming we can't know because there's a conspiracy is unfalsifiable conjecture. It just adds to the burden of proof that aliens are here, that there is also a conspiracy.
Let's start with some basics, which would be UFOs, which we all know stands for Unidentified Flying Objects, or as they're starting to be called today, UAVs, Unidentified Aerial Vehicles.
This is a minor point, but I really haven't heard the term UAV used much outside ufology circles. I think the term UFO was going to persist in the general public for quite a while.
It was shortly after the 2 atomic bombs went off during World War II that UFO sightings spiked around the world. Hundreds of reports of UFOs began to emerge in the decade that followed the incident.
Interestingly, so do anxieties about the potential harm of new technologies. It's probably not a coincidence that as the fears of atomic annihilation were rising and the first popular science fiction movies were coming out, that people started considering that things in the sky might be aliens, when before they might not have jumped to that conclusion. You could say, as some sci-fi films have, such as The Day the Earth Stood Still, that the increase in sightings was due to aliens being more interested in Earth because Earth's nuclear weapons pose some threat to the wider universe. But the problem is that on a galactic scale, nuclear weapons are just not really a big deal. Stars routinely explode with orders of magnitude more energy, and Earth nuclear weapons are a long way off from being able to reach Mars or Venus, never mind having any realistic chance of being deployed against beings in another star system. From the point of view of any non-terrestrial civilization, Earth's current nuclear arsenal is just about as threatening as a slingshot.
And it was in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, that things got really interesting. Reports of a UFO crash landing in the shape of a flying disc inspired tremendous interest in possible alien activity as the US military quickly quarantined and cleaned up the site, claiming it was simply a weather balloon.
The Roswell incident is certainly interesting, and you won't find me arguing that the weather balloon story actually makes much sense. For one thing, there's no reason for the military to so thoroughly clamp down on information about a weather balloon. There are also very strange eyewitness accounts from the incident, but eyewitness accounts are not generally very reliable unless they can be corroborated, and these generally can't. And further, there are more parsimonious explanations for the military's actions surrounding the Roswell incident. A simple option is that rather than a weather balloon, the military was testing spy balloon technology and covering the whole thing up so as not to give out information on their intelligence gathering techniques. This has the advantage that the military routinely classifies the technology they use, as I have seen firsthand working in the nuclear power arm of the United States Navy. And further, it explains the lack of any openness by the US Army and their insistence that the object was just a weather balloon, which is a fairly generic cover story. So when faced with only shaky evidence to the contrary, and no prior verifiable alien encounters, the idea that the military was covering up spy tech is far more plausible than that it was actually a crash by aliens.
This was really the beginning, and today, thanks to modern technology, especially cell phones, we have access to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of seemingly unexplainable UFO sightings from around the world.
A couple things. First, that just looks like planes on a humid day doing aerial acrobatics. You can see fairly ordinary contrails, and they aren't moving in some inexplicable way. And of course, it's cloudy, so we know that contrails would persist in that condition when they might not exist at all in drier conditions. Second, if we can't currently explain something, that doesn't make it aliens. That's the same argument as the God of the Gaps. You just put in aliens instead of God. Unexplained means just that. It's not evidence of aliens. It's not evidence of gods. It's not evidence of dragons. It just means that an explanation is not currently forthcoming. I am 100% willing to acknowledge that things are spotted in the sky that do not have readily available explanations. But that doesn't mean we can just insert our favorite idea. I would love for it to be aliens, but that's not sufficient for me to jump to that conclusion.
My own personal favorite is the Dome of the Rock incident from 2011, where several independent people caught footage of a bright, glowing, and oscillating orb that descended over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. After hovering over the sacred temple for several moments, it shot upwards with tremendous speed, disappearing into the sky.
This might be Jordan's favorite UFO sighting, but it's also a fake. There are a number of problems with this. First among them is that the only source we have for this incident is the footage we just saw. We don't have any other footage of it. We don't have any eyewitnesses. There are no reports of it at all until after the footage was anonymously posted online. The Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem, a sacred city to Jews and Christians, and to a lesser but still significant extent, to Muslims. The building itself is a holy site for Islam, said to be the site of Muhammad's ascension into heaven after being carried to Jerusalem on the back of a winged, human-faced horse. It is built on the site of Herod's temple, which is significant to the religious history and practice of Jews as well as the religious history of Christians. It is one of the most visited sites in the world and is heavily photographed. That such a significant event was not filmed more than once and only reported by a single anonymous person beggars belief. Further, nothing in the footage would be particularly hard to fake with basic special effects. In fact, what you've been watching is just more fake footage. It's pretty easy to do.
In more recent times, a video that was leaked several years ago was released by none other than the Pentagon, featuring 3 separate accounts of US military pilots attempting to track and follow incredibly fast-moving aerial ships, without any clue as to what they were.
Exactly. Without any clue as to what they were. That's not evidence of aliens. In fact, if it were, it would rather contradict the earlier claim that the US government is covering up the aliens. In reality, a better explanation for this footage is just that a bird is being tracked by onboard hardware from a fast-moving fighter jet. The parallax from the moving background makes the subject look faster than it is, and the resolution is too low to make out any real details.
Along with curious phenomena like these, we also have a long list of ex-military officials who have either claimed to have seen or even had some level of interaction with these crafts, identifying that not only are they real, but they have no idea what they are.
Eyewitness testimony is reason to look into something, but from a scientific point of view, it's really not very good evidence. If science is going to take an idea seriously, you need more than just fallible humans claiming they saw a thing. We need actual verifiable physical evidence of the thing that cannot reasonably be explained by known phenomena and processes.
One particular interesting subject in this discussion is the work of Robert Dean, a retired command sergeant major who, after that job, became a ufologist and had been very public about his experiences with UFOs and ETs up until his passing away in 2018.
Robert Dean was indeed a retired soldier in the United States Army. He claims to have held a cosmic top-secret clearance, which is the highest level of the 4 levels of NATO classification. One big problem with his testimony, though, is that the document he claimed to have seen has never been heard of by anyone else willing to come forward, and given that the United States has a now open history of such investigations, such as Project Blue Book, this alleged document, the assessment, is dubious. Further, it is not as if Robert Dean did not have anything to gain from making false and impossible to check on claims. He gained fame and notoriety in the ufology community, and became a bit of a celebrity within that sphere.
At one point, he gave a presentation, the full thing of which you can find available on YouTube, accounting many of the things that he saw in the military and NASA.
I can't find any reason to think Robert Dean was ever in NASA. Further, most of the military members who do end up working for NASA are pilots and therefore officers, since as a rule, only officers are pilots in the United States military. Robert Dean was enlisted, retiring with the rank of Command Sergeant Major, that is, E9, the highest pay grade in the enlisted ranks of the United States military. This is about what you'd expect for someone who retired after 28 years of enlisted service.
The most interesting of which being the story of what happened during the real moon landing.
Oh, you guys haven't heard that there's an even deeper conspiracy than just that NASA faked the Apollo 11 moon landing? Yeah, in this one, an earlier Apollo mission actually landed on the moon in a top-secret mission that the public didn't know about. Then the Apollo 11 landing was faked for TV.
Now, many people today believe that the moon landing itself is a conspiracy, that it was faked because of certain things that stand out about the moon landing that don't make sense, such as why the crosshairs of a camera are appearing behind a particular object on the screen, or the strange objects in the reflection of the astronaut's visor.
So my big question is, why do the retroreflectors left on the moon by the Apollo missions work? They are used to calculate with extreme precision the distance to the moon. They were put there by astronauts and are routinely used by students and professionals nearly every day. Whatever else may be going on, the retroreflectors are there. Further, it would be nearly impossible with 60s technology to fake a moon landing that was so accurate to what being on the real moon would be like. Even in 2009, the film Moon failed utterly at being even close to realistic, despite much better technology. One group of people that have technology more than sufficient to fake moon landings is my patrons. So let's take a moment to thank them. I want to take a little time to thank my channel members and patrons, especially those pledging $20 or more. Bob Knob, Bent Hovind, Ian Chen, Chris Love, Sphincter of Doom, The Venerable Bede, Patrick Dennis, and Res Instance. YouTube is a very volatile platform, what with fraudulent copyright claims, demonetization, and the ever-decreasing share of ad revenue on the platform. It is very hard to rely on YouTube. My members and patrons help keep this channel going, and without them, the channel wouldn't exist. If you'd like to join my Patreon, the link is in the description, and if you'd like to become a channel member, that link is below the video. It's the join button here on YouTube. Either way, you'll get access to early videos, an exclusive Discord server, and if you pledge enough, 3D assets you can use in your own projects.
But what Robert Dean has described was that there was actually a real moon landing. But what happened was that upon arriving at the moon, what the astronauts found was that it was populated.
The moon was populated. The desolate rock from which we have never detected a hint of artificiality that humans didn't themselves put up there. And you have to remember that the moon is a favorite of amateur astronomers the world over. It is the best known and most photographed body in existence besides Earth. We have hyper-detailed maps of the whole thing, and yet still no verifiable signs of extraterrestrial habitation on Luna.
There were, according to him, little alien people walking all over the place, ships flying through the, well, I'd call it air, but I guess they don't have oxygen up there, do they?
Well, first, they don't have a whole lot more than just oxygen. And even if it has no oxygen, but lots of carbon dioxide and or nitrogen as a gas, I'd still call that air. What the moon has is an exosphere, which is a very tenuous envelope of atoms and molecules that move ballistically rather than fluidly. So there is no wind, you can't pump it, but there is something above the surface of the moon. Second, it's great that some guy said a thing, but we need actual physical evidence. We don't even have blurry photos like we do for Bigfoot. Spaceships and little green men walking around need an infrastructure, and to date neither the ships, the base, nor any other indication of the presence of aliens on the moon has been found by anyone willing to actually demonstrate their findings in a scientific manner.
This was such a shock to the astronauts that after their visit they returned back with 40 rolls of film of what they saw, and NASA supposedly destroyed it.
Oh, well, that was wonderful. Good time was had by all. I'm pooped.
Yes, I should be. Good Lord, what is happening in there?
40 reels of alien pictures? 40 reels of alien pictures?
At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
May I see it?
No.
The thinking seems to be that the revelation of this truth was so out there that NASA buried the truth because of what would happen to the world if this was to get out.
Would it really be that much more of a shock than when the world realized that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe? Or that it wasn't even the solar system? I don't actually know the answer to that question, but society has gone through revelations about the place of the world in the wider cosmos more than once, and emerged from it pretty well. In fact, it might very much be that such knowledge would serve to unite humanity in their shared interest as a species.
Now, I'm not saying that I'm in support of hiding the truth, but at the same time, think of how many religious beliefs would be shattered from this truth.
Not many, I think. In 2014, Pope Francis of the Roman Catholic Church said that if aliens existed, he would be open to them becoming Christians and would allow them to be baptized into the Roman Catholic Church. Most religions, I think, could adapt well, since nothing about the existence of aliens really contradicts the existence of creator deities, nor does it likely falsify any of the stories about such deities' acts here on Earth. Sure, it might be bad news for young Earth creationism and other such religious ideas, but those ones are already way past salvaging anyway. Then again, given the persistence of things like creationism in the face of evidence we already have, perhaps even the religions that would be threatened by intelligent alien life would end up persisting just fine.
How much chaos would be caused if, all of a sudden, our entire global paradigm was to change in an instant?
Well, assuming the revelation of alien life didn't come in the form of an invasion, I'm not really sure what kind of chaos, if any, would result.
You may be familiar with a man named Bob Lazar, one of, if not the first, to come forward with inside leaks about the secret government UFO programs.
I am, in fact, familiar with Bob Lazar, the man who says things that make no sense in terms of science and who backs this up with, as far as I know, an unsubstantiated claim to have worked near Area 51. Area 51, of course, being a testing ground for experimental, but very human aircraft.
He claimed to have been hired in the late 1980s to reverse engineer purported extraterrestrial technology at what he described was a secret site called S4, a site similar to, and rather close to, Area 51.
Which is great, except there is no evidence that he actually worked at S4, Area 51, or even Los Alamos, where he also claimed to work.
He described that he had access to a recovered UFO ship and for several years was attempting to discover the secrets of how it worked.
Then I'm sure what we're about to hear will make lots of sense and not at all be just total gibberish.
Lazar claimed that the propulsion of the studied vehicle was fueled by the chemical element with the atomic number 115, known today as moscovium, or E-115, which at the time was named unumpentium, since it hadn't been created yet. However, it was first synthesized in 2003 by a joint team of Russian and American scientists for real.
Yes, it was, but keep in mind that its most stable form still has a half-life of 0.65 seconds. That means if you had a full metric ton of it, after 1 minute, you would have about 2 zeptograms. That's a decimal point with 20 zeros after it, followed by a 2 grams. Which is to say, if you had a solid ton of nothing but moscovium-290, after a minute you would end up with approximately 5 atoms of the stuff left. I probably don't have to tell you that 5 atoms isn't really enough to do anything with.
He said that the propulsion system relied on a stable isotope of E115.
No stable isotope of moscovium does or can exist, because the weak nuclear force simply cannot hold on to giant atoms like that. Lead-208 is about as big as a stable atom can get, and that's 82 protons and 126 neutrons. Moscovium has 115 protons by definition, and even its most stable isotope as stated, moscovium-290, has 175 neutrons. There is simply no way for an atomic nucleus that big to stay stable with any version of our understanding of physics. And remember, it's not like scientists haven't looked into it. Granted, they hadn't when Bob was making these claims, but they have now, and had before this video was made.
Which supposedly generated a gravity wave after being excited by livermorium, element 116, during proton bombardment.
Livermorium has the same problem, but almost 10 times worse. The half-life of the most stable isotope of livermorium is only 60 milliseconds, which is 9 1/3 times shorter than that of moscovium-290. So you can't really do anything with these elements, because they just don't exist long enough. They almost immediately break apart, as do all the synthetic elements. There's a reason we don't find them outside of laboratories, because in nature they simply couldn't persist even if they were made.
He argued that the decay products brought about by the reaction between the two elements would include gravitons, a hypothetical quantum particle that is thought to be responsible for gravity.
Gravitons are a hypothetical boson with a spin of 2 and no mass. If they exist, they would be the force carrier for gravity. That is, they would be to gravity what photons are to light and what gluons are to the strong nuclear force. But as is, no one has found any way to even hypothetically make them. And they may not exist. It is still an open question as to whether the theory of quantum gravity will result with a force of gravity with a force-carrying graviton, or if it will be more in line with relativity, in which gravity is not so much a force, but a shift in the local coordinate system that manifests locally as an apparent force. Either way, bombarding moscovium and livermorium with protons will not produce gravitons. It will just produce nuclear fission in the nuclei in question, and so you'll lose your moscovium and livermorium even faster than the blistering pace you were already losing them at. And this isn't some contentious thing. This is the basis of how nuclear reactors work. You shoot protons at big nuclei, and when they are absorbed into said nuclei, the nuclei become unstable and burst apart.
In his new Netflix documentary, he used the analogy that the craft is kind of like a bowling ball. If you were to put a ball onto a piece of fabric or your bedsheet, and then proceeded to push down on the areas around it, the bowling ball would fall forward into the bends and gaps that you create around it. In this way, the craft would kind of just fall through space by distorting space-time around it, like in a continuous rolling motion.
This is a form of reactionless propulsion, and it's not strictly speaking impossible. This is essentially a warp drive. You just have to be able to harness an amount of power that would rival the total output of the sun, and I mean that literally. However, it is the case that in August of 2020, Eric W. Lenz at the Astrophysics Institute of a university in a German city I'm not going to try to pronounce, did manage to find a solution for Einstein's field equations that would result in a sublight warp bubble. Of course, that is still not helping us with faster-than-light travel, which is an important part of having biological aliens visiting Earth.
This is what allowed the vehicle to fly and to evade visual detection by bending light around it.
So, engines that couldn't last more than a second, that wouldn't have any fancy gravitational effects as described, also cloak the ships. Yeah, that checks out. And Bob Lazar is totally not just Looney Tunes crazy. I think that's going to be it for this episode. But we have plenty left with this crazy nonsense. So I hope you enjoyed this dip into the realm of New Age alien conspiracy. I hope you hang in there for the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure you hit the bell icon and turn on all notifications. Finally, let me know in the comments what you thought of the video, whether good or bad. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.
How